There are nearly 5 million English language learners in our U.S. public schools today. For the purpose of this presentation, I will focus on Spanish speakers. When a Spanish-speaking ELL student does not fit your mold, by Dr. Cristina Saldaña. How do you define a minority student? Let's talk about this for a minute. A minority student is a member of a racial or ethnic group other than the racial or ethnic group that represents the majority. So what group is the majority in your district, city, and state? How can a minority student be different? What do you consider different? They might speak a different language in the home. Their ethnicity might be different. So the food they eat is not a typical American food. They might listen to music in their native language. They might wear different type of clothing. Their religious practices may be different. Their cultural norms and rules might also be different. So the way they behave in public might seem different to you, or the way they behave at home. Their family expectations and priorities might be different too. So a Mexican family, for example, might prioritize work and providing food and clothing for their children above academics. Different than a Colombian family per se. So how are the students in your school different? Can a minority student be a different learner as well? So they might interpret school rules and classroom rules differently, and so they might seem like they are not behaving like a typical child. They might react to authority in a different way. They might not make eye contact with you. They might not even give you verbal responses. They might stay quiet. The manner in which they learn might also be different than a typical American child. So what learning behaviors do you observe, and could those behaviors be influenced by the child's culture? Something to think about. Does a difference mean the student has a disability? Let's question this. Is the teacher implementing scientifically sound programs and strategies to serve the student's weaknesses? Is the teacher managing the behavior by using appropriate strategies? Is the teacher sending assignments home in the native language for extra home support? Now, I put this down because we are providing regular education in English to children who are learning English. So are they really learning everything that a monolingual English speaker is learning? We have to figure out how to best serve this child. So if we want the child to learn the concepts at a decent rate, we should also be sending those assignments in their native language, so that way they can get the stimulation at home. We have to think also, what is our reaction to that difference? It's going to affect the child's learning. Here's something important that I want to focus on. Is it possible that schools are violating a minority student's civil rights without knowing it? Federal law is violated if, number one, a student is excluded from effective participation in school because of his or her inability to speak and understand the language of instruction. Number two, federal law is violated if a minority student is inappropriately assigned to special education classes because of their lack of English skills. Number three, federal law is violated when programs for students whose English is less than proficient are not designed to teach them English as soon as possible, or if the programs operate as a dead-end track. And number four, federal law is also violated when parents whose English is limited do not receive school notices or other information in a language they can understand. So what legal obligations do schools have to English language learners? Civil rights law says that schools are obligated to ensure that ELLs have equal access to education. In the Supreme Court case of Lau versus Nichols, arose this statement. I want to read it. There is no equality of treatment merely by providing students with the same facilities textbooks, teachers, and curriculum. For students who do not understand English are effectively foreclosed from any meaningful education. I think that quote is powerful. The Office of Civil Rights in the U.S. Department of Education gives some guidelines. The first guideline is they want schools to develop a program which, in view of experts in the field, has a reasonable chance for success. Also, ensure that necessary staff, curricular materials, and facilities are in place and used properly. Develop appropriate evaluation standards for measuring the progress of ELL students, and assess the success of the program and modify if needed. The courts consider 3 factors to assess the adequacy of a program. They assess whether the school's program is based upon sound educational theory or principles. They also assess whether the school's program is reasonably calculated to implement the educational theory effectively, and they assess whether, after a period of time sufficient to give the program a legitimate trial, the results of the program show that language barriers are actually overcome. The United States Department of Justice lists types of educational discrimination. And on their list, they include race and/or national origin discrimination, sex-based discrimination, religious discrimination, English language learner student discrimination, and disability discrimination. So in the following slides, we will look at English language learner student discrimination. English language learner student discrimination is defined as a failure to provide a language acquisition program to its ELL students, or failure to provide adequate language services to its ELL students, a failure to provide resources to implement its language acquisition program effectively, and a failure to take steps to identify students who are not proficient in English. Also, it is a failure to provide language assistance to ELL students because they receive special education services, or a failure to provide special education services to ELL students when they qualify for special education services. And also, it is discrimination if the school excludes ELL students from gifted and talented programs based on their limited English proficiency. Now, I want to look at possible scenarios when there are too many exclusionary factors to consider special education. So sometimes there's a student, the teachers are begging for help, they're adamant that there is a problem, either a learning problem, behavior problem, and they want help. And they think that the only way to get help is putting the child in special education. So let's look at these scenarios and analyze them. In scenario 1, an ELL kindergartner is having behavior problems. He has only received 6 months of formal schooling. He never attended preschool. Parents only speak Spanish and are a low-income family. So what are the options? If we are not suspecting a cognitive disability, then maybe the student needs to hear a little bit more Spanish during the day to ease the frustration. Maybe during independent reading time, the child could be placed at a computer with headphones and listen to phonics lessons in Spanish. Now, my question here is, why are we considering special education before retention? If he never had preschool and he's so far behind at this point, consider retention. But also, if the parents only speak Spanish, let's help bridge the 2 languages even more by sending assignments in Spanish for the family to do together. Here's the next scenario. An ELL first grader's speech is difficult to understand. Spanish and an indigenous Native American language are spoken in the home. She's learning English at school. She's missing her top and bottom front teeth. The teachers are complaining. She's very difficult to understand. So what do we have to do? Because she's trilingual at this point, we need to prove that she really has a disability and not a difference. So even if she's difficult to understand in English and possibly Spanish, how do we know she has that difficulty in her native indigenous language? So we need time. We need time to implement strategies. Again, we can send homework assignments so that parents could practice at home with the child, but we cannot automatically place a child in special education when there's a third language involved, the student is just starting first grade, and on top of that, she's missing teeth that can definitely impact intelligibility. Here's another scenario. An ELL middle schooler just arrived from his country. His attendance was poor in his country. There are gaps in his education. He's now performing several grades below expectations. What do we do? Well, again, we have to prove that this child has a disability. But if he was deprived of an education, is he truly disabled? Or are we responsible for filling in those gaps? Now, why would a student have such an interruption in academics? Well, in some Latin American countries, Central American countries, the children are expected at a certain age to help cover the cost of food. They go out and they're working at an early age, and that to them is a priority over education. Something to think about. Here's the next scenario. A fourth grader is reading 2 grades below expectation. The school team decides he must need a bilingual speech-language screening to determine whether a language disorder exists. There are no concerns regarding social skills or language. No data was tracked for communication skills. Should a speech-language pathologist screen this child? The answer is no, because the problem area is not speech and language. The primary deficit area appears to be in academics. So teachers and even the psychologists should be responsible for helping to assess and monitor the child's performance. This is the last scenario. An ELL second grader has received the same reading program for nearly 2 years and has made minimal progress. What should teachers do? Well, my first question is, why have you been beating a reading program into a child for 2 years without any progress? Have you considered another option? And if that other option is tracked and minimal progress is seen, then try a third option before special education is considered. Now, ELLs process language and phonics differently. Let me explain. What should teachers know about Spanish in order to teach reading in English? Spanish is a transparent language. What does that mean? What you hear is what you see. The sounds match what you say. English is not a transparent language. Oftentimes, what you hear does not match the individual letter sounds, so it is confusing to Spanish speakers. Teachers want to do what is right. It is obvious. Teachers may not know how, though. So they need to learn to create charts to collect and track data, target specific areas of weakness. Use sound reading and language programs that are effective for ELLs. Here I will introduce Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 effective tools that school districts are administering as reading interventions for ELLs. The first one is Imagine Learning. Another one is Leveled Literacy Intervention and Foundations Wilson Language Basics. Some schools are also doing guided reading strategies based on phonics, balanced literacy curriculum for 2 hours daily, which includes read aloud, shared reading, small group guided reading, independent work, and more. And they're also considering the Estrellita reading program. And that program is interesting because it takes what they know in Spanish and links it to the English. For Tier 2, they're considering foundations at a slower rate while maintaining efficacy, so they obtain data to track progress and decide if the child needs a more intensive service. They're also doing level literacy intervention for Tier 2, which includes Fontel and Pinnell resources for the ELLs, and they do that through a small group guided reading program. For Tier 3, they're doing reading recovery, which is literacy learning designed for individuals on a one-on-one intervention basis for first graders. And they're also doing the Wilson reading system. What should our goal be as educators of English language learners? We cannot be expected to know the native language of all our students, right? Our goal should be to provide an equal playing field for students who are learning English. You might think it is sufficient to have them sitting in the classroom during your lessons, but are they really obtaining an equal education as compared to monolingual students? Are they given a fair opportunity to learn the same concepts if the language is a barrier? If your school does not have a dual language program, then teachers should make an effort to bridge the school and home languages by sending homework assignments in the native language that target curriculum vocabulary and new concepts. My name is Dr. Cristina Saldaña. I'm a proponent of bilingual education. I myself was an ELL student in elementary school. I had the benefit of learning to read and write in Spanish at home while learning English at school, and I did the same for my children. I've created and published many workbooks and worksheets in English and Spanish. Please visit Bilingual Resources for Therapists and Teachers on Facebook, Instagram, and Teachers Pay Teachers. Thank you for watching and wanting to learn more about effective methods for teaching culturally and linguistically diverse students.